They said the warp was chaos, a realm of madness, of endless screaming. But they were wrong. The warp does not scream. It breathes. It breathes like a dying thing, wheezing and wet, each exhale filled with the perfume of infection and the sweetness of rot. It moves, softly, like lungs collapsing under their own decay. And if you listen long enough, if you silence your fear, your reason, your humanity, you will hear it whisper. That is where the Psyker's story begins. He had seen the warp before, flashes of crimson storms, laughter without mouths, cities built from screams. But this was different. The air was thick, not with hatred, but with warmth. The colors bled green, gold, brown, and the tender red of old wounds half healed. There was a scent, heavy and rich like soil after rain, or like the body of something that had lived too long. The Psyker could taste it on his tongue life, decaying into itself. He walked across the landscape and felt it breathing beneath his boots. The ground was soft, spongy, alive. Every step sank into something that sighed back at him. At first, he thought he was in a forest. He could see trees, their trunks twisted, their bark pulsating with veins that glowed faintly green. The leaves shimmered as though wet with dew. But when he reached out, he saw it was not dew, it was sweat. The tree itself perspired. It was alive, too alive, and it smelled of sweetness and sickness. He heard a sound distant at first, then nearer. It was laughter. Not mocking, not cruel. A deep, round, fatherly laugh. It echoed through the forest like thunder muffled by honey. It came again, closer this time, followed by the sound of children singing. The Psyker froze. He had heard many things in the warp, the promises of demons, the cries of damned souls, the whisper of Science's lies. But this was joy, and joy had no place here. He turned and saw movement among the trees. Tiny figures, small, round, waddling. They danced between the roots, leaving trails of mold and moss wherever they touched. Their laughter bubbled like boiling stew. They were happy. And then he saw their faces. Their eyes were pits of pus, their mouths torn too wide in smiles that never closed. Their skin peeled away in layers of color, pink, yellow, green, as if trying to shed life itself. Yet they were not in pain. They were content. They saw him and waved. "Come, brother," they called in voices like rusted bells. "Come and see Father's garden. He's been waiting for you." He stepped back, but the ground pulsed beneath him, pushing him forward, almost tenderly. The air trembled. And then, like a curtain being drawn, the forest opened. He saw the garden. It stretched beyond sight, a continent of decay and beauty intertwined. Massive trees of bone and bark rose into a sky that bled green light. Flowers bloomed from corpses. Rivers of thick, yellow water wound through valleys of fungus, taller than spires. Flies filled the air like constellations. They didn't bite. They sang. Their wings produced a constant hum, a melody that felt almost holy. The Psyker fell to his knees, overwhelmed by the sheer life of it. It was grotesque, but it was magnificent. Every inch of this garden was alive, moving, shifting, growing, and somewhere within it all, there was a rhythm, a pulse, a heartbeat. He whispered, almost to himself, "Whose realm is this?" And the garden answered. It did not speak with words, it spoke with breath. The wind carried warmth, a scent of fermentation and milk. The trees leaned closer, their roots curling around him like fingers. A voice rolled through the air, deep, soft, infinitely kind. "Mine, little one." The sound made the Psyker weep, not from fear, from recognition. He had heard voices of gods before. Tzeentch's was sharp and cruel, Khorne's a roar of hunger, Slaanesch's a whisper of pleasure. But this voice was gentle. It was a father speaking to a feverish child. "You are sick, aren't you?" the voice said. "So tired, so afraid. Come, let me help you." The Psyker tried to resist, but his legs gave way. He fell forward, catching himself on the soil. It was warm. He realized the ground was made of flesh. It pulsed beneath his palms, slow and steady. The rhythm calmed him, like a heartbeat he had always known but forgotten. From the mist, a figure emerged, enormous, filling the horizon, a mountain of rotting flesh and kindness. His form was impossible to describe. Half man, half mountain, half disease, half love. His belly hung low and split open, leaking nectar that steamed as it touched the soil. From it grew flowers, delicate, pale, luminescent. His face was round, cracked by wrinkles, and smiling. Always smiling, his eyes were hollow pits glowing with gentle green fire. This was Nurgle the Plague Father, the Lord of Decay, the grandfather of pestilence. And he was beautiful. The Psyker tried to speak but only coughed, his lungs filling with something sweet and heavy. The god laughed again, a deep, booming joy that made the trees tremble. "Don't be frightened, my child," Nurgle said. "You are dying. But that's all right. Everything dies. Everything lives again. It is the way of things." The Psyker felt something brush his face, a hand the size of a world, soft as fungus. Where it touched, the skin blackened, cracked, then healed. The pain disappeared. The fear disappeared. He felt warmth spread through his body like infection. He felt peace. "You've suffered long enough," said Nurgle. "Rest now. Let it happen. Let the world feed upon you, and you upon it. That is the truth of all things." The Psyker looked down at his arm. His veins glowed green. His flesh was blistering, bubbling like thick stew. He screamed, but the sound came out as laughter. It felt good. For the first time in years, the pain of existence vanished. The terror of the warp became melody. The universe made sense because it was rotting, and that was beautiful. He looked up at the god, tears streaming from eyes that were no longer eyes. "Why?" he whispered. "Why show me this? Why make it beautiful?" Nurgle's smile deepened. "Because, little one, you needed to understand. Decay is not the end. It is the beginning. Even your scream feeds new life. Even your fear becomes soil. Every death is a seed, and I am the gardener." The ground around the Psyker erupted with life. Flowers of bone and mucus blossomed from the corpses buried beneath. Vines crept up the trees, dripping with honey-colored pus. Insects swarmed around him, landing gently on his skin, crawling into his wounds, not to feed, but to soothe. "See," the god murmured, "they love you already." He reached out and took the Psyker in his hand. The man's body dissolved, flesh turning to sludge, bones melting into the soil. But his mind, his soul, did not die. It expanded, diffusing into the warmth around him. He felt everything. The heartbeat of the trees, the laughter of the flies, the sigh of the soil. He was part of the garden now. "Sleep, my child," Nurgle whispered. "Tomorrow you'll bloom." The Psyker would have wept if he still had eyes. He saw himself reborn not as man, but as something eternal. A single blossom in the infinite garden. A small, breathing miracle of rot. And as he faded into the dream of the god, he realized the truth that all mortals eventually learn. Death was never the enemy. It was love wearing the mask of disease. Centuries later, in the mortal galaxy, a hive world would die. A new plague would spread, gentle and slow. The sick would laugh through their fever. The dying would smile as their skin blistered. And on their lips, before the end, they would whisper the same words the Psyker once heard in the garden. "He loves us. He loves us all." The warp does not scream. It breathes. And somewhere in the breathing, beneath the hum of 1,000,000,000,000 flies, you can still hear the whisper of decay. Soft, kind, endless. He did not awaken from the garden. He settled into it, the way a bruise settles under skin. The Psyker did not have a mouth any longer, not in the fastidious sense biology prefers. Yet he could taste sweetness, overripe fruit, warm milk, iron that had forgotten to be sharp. He could not tell where his body ended and the soil began, because the soil was busy remembering bodies, and the bodies were busy remembering blossoms. In that kind of remembering, borders are impolite. He tried to count time, and discovered time did not care to be counted here. It sagged like wet cloth on a line, and then lifted itself again, cheerful about the mold. Seasons were a rumor, growth was the law. Decay was the parliament that passed it unanimously. Somewhere, not far, and also infinitely far, children were laughing. They arrived like small comets of delight, round-bellied things with too many dimples and not enough skin, their smiles stitched wide and honest. They ran on feet that squelched delightfully and shed a trail of moss as if sharing was their nature. One hopped onto the root he had become and patted him with a hand that left gentle rot behind. "Brother," it said in a voice like a kettle beginning to sing, "you're doing very well. Another leaned close and whispered as if divulging state secrets. "He loves you," it said, conspiratorial, then giggled until flies rose in a golden halo. They were not cruel. They were not kind in the way surgeons are kind. They were busy with the work of affection. And affection here was fermentation. What happens to sweetness when it commits to becoming richer? He felt the attention then, a warmth like blankets around fever, a gaze that carried approval without measurement. The garden hushed, which is to say its noises arranged themselves into listening. Leaves beat their little green hearts more slowly. Rivers of honey and pus braided themselves into quieter music. From the mist, the god came again. Grandfather Nurgle, Plaguefather vaster than any cathedral and intimate as a kitchen. His presence cancelled distance. The psyker felt himself lifted without rising. In such arms you are always close. The god's smile was not the grin of victory or mockery. It was the home smile, the one family wears when the prodigal returns with his pockets full of mud. "How is the breathing?" Nurgle asked, voice low as a storm receding behind hills. "I don't," the psyker tried to say, and realized that he did. The garden breathed him, and he breathed the garden, a reciprocation too polite to demand notice. "Of course you do," the god chuckled. "Everything that lives has learned to be a lung for something else." He remembered the other gods as one remembers fevers. Corn, the blade that insists. Tsiench, the lie that keeps its promises. Slanesh, the hunger that paints its mouth. And this one Nurgle laughter that refuses to end even when the joke is life. He had, in the proud days of terror, believed decay was simply the arithmetic of endings. Here he understood decay as grammar, the way the sentence keeps going. "You are afraid of endings," Nurgle said, examining a flower that was trying very hard to be both a mouth and a sermon. "So you treat them as enemies. But listen." The god placed the flower to the psyker's ear. It sighed. Inside the sigh was a history of things that had decided to stop pretending they could last forever. There were orchards in that sigh, and ships, and vows. None of them were failures. All of them were compost. "This is my truth," Nurgle went on. "Life is very brave. It steps into the world knowing it will be asked to leave. I make that leaving gentle. I teach the world to eat itself without malice and to be nourished by the lesson." A wind came, puddled around the god's vast ankles, and wandered on scented with cloves and hospitals. The psyker was not persuaded. Persuasion is for arguments that can be won. He was accompanied into understanding. The god did not hurry him. They walked though the garden carried, the psyker as a brook carries a leaf past groves where bone was handsome as bark, past a lake whose surface wore fungus like lace, and whose depths hummed with lullabies. A procession came winding along the bank. Once, men in bell, rattling mail, rust shimmering like old wine on their pauldrons. Death Guard, the faithful who had stopped pretending to be afraid of stains. Their leader's face was a heraldry of scars and smiles. He knelt before Nurgle with the clank and creak of a beloved hinge. "Grandfather," he said, and the title carried no irony. "The garden is strong." "Of course it is," said the god, fond as bread. "It has you to carry its song." The psyker felt a memory pass through him he knew was not his. A ship caught in the warp, the air turning to soup, hope rotting into something kinder. A voice offering relief, a legion learning to laugh through their coughing. It should have been horror. It was resignation upgraded into peace. "Are you the god of disease?" the psyker asked, foundry, soft. Nurgle pretended to consider, the way grandfathers pretend to decide whether another slice of cake would be indecent. "I am the god of continuance," he said at last. "Disease is one of my better teachers." Teacher of what? Of humility, of interdependence, of limits that turn strangers into kin, of the body's ancient pact with time. A plague bloom burst on the lake then, flinging spores that glittered like confetti. Where the spores landed, frogs blinked into being glossy, luminous, singing in coughs that harmonized. Children Nurglings, these small scholars of silliness, threw themselves into the water and returned wearing crowns of mold. Nurgle clapped, delighted. "They embarrass the proud," he said. "They remind the unkind that softness is stronger than stone." "But you hurt them," the psyker said, watching one of the frogs go still and become 3 fragrant mushrooms. "You hurt everyone." "I end pain," the god corrected mildly. "I redistribute it until it becomes warmth." He bent and touched the mushrooms. They swelled, burst into fruit that fell, and split to reveal seeds already eager. Nothing is lost here. That is my kindness. He showed the psyker a grove of patience. They lay in hammocks spun from old bandages and new spider silk, their chests moving with the concentration of sleep. Hands tended them, hands that were branches, hands that were flies, hands that were people who had forgotten what their old names were and did not miss them. Each patient had two faces, one that grimaced in the deep habit of suffering, one that smiled in the recent habit of acceptance. The smiles were winning. They came to me, Nurgle said, carrying stones they called fear. I gave them baskets. They put their stones down. Look how well they are doing. A woman's skin cracked like old paint and sloughed away, new tissue beneath rich as bread crust. A man's cough loosened and turned into a hymn, so low the roots sang along. From another, flies rose and wrote on the air in looping cursive, "It is all right." The psyker wanted to accuse the god of lies, but the accusation made no sense here. There were no lies. There were remedies whose names decent society refused to speak. "You are different from the others," he said instead. Nurgle beamed as if the compliment had been crafted for him particularly. "Ah, but we are a family. Every family needs someone to bake, someone to scold, someone to sing the wrong songs at the right time." His laugh stirred the canopies into applause. "I am the one who keeps leftovers miraculous." He spread his vast arms, and the garden pivoted to show another corner, a workshop whose benches were crowded with jars and dreams. Here Nurgle brewed. Cauldrons spoke in burps and bubbles. Ladles moved themselves. Recipes were written in spore and amended by mildew. Each vial contained a story about how a body might be asked to change and how that change could be made interesting. "I am hope," he said, stirring a pot that smelled like grandmothers and graveyards. "Some call that cruel. They are mistaken about what hope is for." The psyker remembered hope as sharp a needle you jab into the future until it bleeds a little blessing. Nurgle's hope was round. You could sit on it. You could nap. "When all things fail," the god went on, "I am what keeps hands moving. If you cannot live, you can continue. If you cannot be strong, you can be held. If you cannot be pure, you can be useful to the soil. Is that not dignity?" He did not await an answer. He poured a ladleful of emerald cordial onto the floor. The floor drank with enthusiasm. Somewhere a bell rang twice, satisfied. "Do you envy the living?" the psyker asked, emboldened by the god's cheer. "Little one," said Nurgle, bending until his face was a weather system around the question. "I am the living, after their names fall off." A procession entered the workshop then. Plague-bearers, tall, gaunt officials with bellies that were ledgers. They carried tally sticks strung with teeth and muttered numbers that meant accountability. Each presented a jar of breath collected from the dying, and the god took each jar with the reverence baker's reserve for the first loaf of the day. "They are my accountants," he said proudly. "Every gasp is recorded. Every sigh is cashed out as rain." He tapped a jar gently. It sighed and became drizzle that wandered off to bless a bed of sickly ferns into ardent health. The ferns waved, polite and damp. The psyker felt the question that had been trying to chew its way out of him since the first laugh. "Why do they come to you at all?" he asked. "Why not resist until the end?" "Because resistance is lonely," the god said without reproach, "and I am company. Because despair is heavy, and I am strong. Because fear is dry, and I am moist." He chuckled at his own joke. "But mostly because I am honest. I make no promises I cannot keep. They will die. With me, they need not do it alone, and they need not waste their last strength pretending." He showed the psyker a place where worlds came to terms. A ring of stones, each the memory of a planet. The psyker touched one. It tasted of rust and lullabies. The world had died in coughing fits and candlelight. Its last act had been to build gardens inside its ruins. Nurgle had written thank you on it in moss. "You are not mercy," the psyker said, meaning it as observation. "Mercy is a cousin," Nurgle agreed. "We see each other at weddings." They moved again because the garden has an itinerary that includes everything eventually. The god led him to a gate that was also a curtain, that was also a membrane asking polite questions. Beyond, the places where Nurgle's attention became policy. Cities in the Materium forgot to be proud and remembered to be neighborly for a week. Armies set down their weapons to hold the fevers of their enemies until they cooled. Priests with clean hands learn to bless stains. You see, said Nurgle, pleased. I do not conquer. I convert suffering into belonging. The psyker, whose career had been suffering, converted into astronomy for the Emperor's maps, recognized the economy, and hated himself for the recognition. There is cruelty in this, he said softly. Of course there is, said the god, unoffended. There is cruelty in all labor. Even baking burns someone eventually. I merely make the heat worthwhile. A gust came then, scented with antiseptic and fear. It was not from the garden. It carried the bitter hymn of wards and masks, and the bureaucracies of cleanliness. Nurgle inhaled and sighed, like a gourmand tolerant of rival cuisine. They work very hard to hate me, he said, not sad. It is good for the arms. He sat, took the shape of sitting, would be more precise, and his bulk settled entire hills into laps. Nurglings swarmed across his shins as children swarm over a patient giant. He lifted one. It burbled and erupted into starlings that fluttered away laughing and promptly turned back into the same Nurgling elsewhere. Continuity having a sense of humor. Stay, he told the psyker. Watch. Learn the names of soft things. You will be asked to teach them to others when they arrive frightened. What if I want to leave? The psyker asked, and was ashamed of the smallness in the question. Then you will leave, said Nurgle, surprised that bureaucracy might apply. What did you think this was a prison? No. Prisons are for pride. This is a kitchen. You may go when you have eaten enough. The garden laughed for him, 1,000 kettle laughs coming to boil because the garden has very kind manners. He felt himself loosen, which is the garden's word for courage. He could go. He could return to the choir pits, to the iron and the clean pane, and the gold light that burns without ever baking. He could stand again between gods that despised pity as a solvable error. He could remember that his throat was not a reed for flies, but a tube for hymns that navigate stars. He looked one last time at the god, the smile, the dimples tunneled into cheeks vast as weathered cliffs, the eyes that were not eyes but hollows full of glowworm patience. Are you happy? He asked, without meaning to be brave. Yes, said Nurgle, and the garden seconded with a rustle like applause. Because nothing is wasted here. Because I can hold what the universe drops when it is tired. Because even failure ferments into something you can put on bread. He leaned closer. His breath was spice and sick room and comfort. And you? Can you be happy where the air is antiseptic and the chairs are thrones? The psyker did not answer. He did not need to. Nurgle's smile widened until it became weather. Go then, he said, and patted the soil, which immediately grew a path. Carry some softness with you. The world above is very frightened. It thinks cleanliness will save it. Teach it how to rest without rotting. The path rose like dough. The children escorted him, solemn for once, bells chiming at their belts. One placed a crown of mildew on his brow. It smelled of attics and first rains. Will you, the psyker began, and Nurgle, who is very good at finishing other people's sentences, finished this one kindly. Be here when you fall again? Of course, the garden keeps its appointments. He stepped onto the path. It floated through veils that were both mold and mist. Behind him the laughter continued, and the humming of flies braided itself into a lullaby so persuasive even the stones yawned. The last thing he saw was the god turning back to his work, stirring, sewing, tallying, reminding mortals and stars alike that the end is a kind of usefulness. He woke in the choir pit with a weight on his chest that was not fear. He touched his brow, and his hand came away scented with something green and clean by its own standards. Around him the machines wheezed their immaculate music. A warden peered in, nostrils pinched against the perpetual hospital of the place. Again? The warden asked, as one asks a clock if it is still convinced about time. Again, the psyker said, and his voice was low and warm in ways it had not been allowed to be before. He looked down at his hands. Their scars had become softer in their opinions. The hymn began. He opened his mouth, and the light did what it always does, poured through throats like molten assignment. But beneath the heroism and geometry of the Emperor's need, he heard a small domestic music, kettles, blankets, a god stirring something thick and sweet, while the world outside learned to be tired without despair. He sang, and the song did not mind sharing the throat with a laugh that had learned to be reverent. That night, when the garden visited on the breath between pulses, he understood the doctrine the father of affliction had taught without argument. Decay is not a verdict. It is a vow. We are promised to each other breath to breath, bone to soil, grief to bread. And the God who smiles will keep that promise as long as there are names for softness. In the darkness behind his eyes, a bell rang once, approving. Then the flies took up the refrain, and somewhere in the warp a kitchen lamp burned through the long, wet night. He dreamed again, or perhaps he never stopped. Dreams and waking had the same temperature here, tepid, comforting, a fever without pain. When his eyes opened, they were the eyes of the garden, and the garden was busy remembering him. The air was thicker now. The sweetness had aged. It had learned to hum. Spores drifted like lazy snow, and every flake that landed began to grow something. He watched a fallen leaf curl, soften, and open into a hand. The hand reached for the sky and became a branch. The branch sighed in wind and became ash. The ash fed the leaf again. He understood the lesson before Nurgle appeared. The god always arrived after the meaning had already found him. "You see," the voice said, soft as damp cloth. "Everything keeps its appointment. You die, you bloom, you fall apart, and the pieces remember how to be useful." The psyker sat at the edge of a pond that was more lung than water. Bubbles rose and burst with gentle belches. Each one exhaled a fragrance of fermentation, ripe pears and rust. Beneath the surface, faces drifted. They were calm, eyes closed, their mouths releasing songs in bubbles. Some he recognized from the Imperium. Some were too old, too kind to have ever worn armor. "Are they dead?" he asked. "They are returning," said Nurgle. "Nothing stays dead unless it insists." The god crouched beside him. His vast body collapsed into folds of generosity. Maggots glimmered like pearls across his arms. Flies nested in his beard, humming hymns. His grin was a sunrise that smelled of cider and open wounds. "When the universe was young," said Nurgle, "it believed in straight lines. Birth, life, death. Such ambition. But the straight line grew tired. It bent, then coiled, and finally learned the joy of circles. I am that joy." The pond erupted in applause. Frogs croaked in rhythm, their throats shining with pus like candlelight. The psyker watched, entranced. He remembered the imperial priests preaching of purity, of cleansing, of purging. He remembered how each cleansing demanded fire, how each prayer begged for annihilation. Here, there was no cleansing, only continuation. "Decay," said the god, "is the confession of things that love too much. Flowers, flesh, even stars, they hold on until they burst. It is not failure, it is generosity." The psyker looked into the pond. His reflection smiled back, swollen, soft, skin blooming with tiny lichens. The sight didn't frighten him. It looked true. "You teach mercy through infection," he whispered. "I teach honesty," the god corrected. "Everything wants to go home. I only give it directions." A wind moved through the garden, thick and fragrant. It carried whispers, soft words, gentle laughter, and the sound of weeping that wasn't sad. Around them, the plants leaned closer. Some were trees, others were organs that had grown fond of photosynthesis. Each leaf trembled as if listening. "Do you know why mortals despair?" Nurgle asked. "Because they think they are separate from the things that feed on them. They imagine boundaries where there are only conversations." The psyker thought of bones feeding roots, of smoke becoming rain. He thought of bodies burned on pyres to keep soldiers warm. He thought of how every breath the living took had already belonged to something else. "The cycle doesn't end," he said. "Of course not," Nurgle laughed. "It dances. Death steps forward. Life follows. They are partners. I am the music." He rose, towering again, a continent of devotion. The ground sighed beneath his feet, exhaling tiny spores that sparkled like gold dust. Nurglings emerged from behind him, carrying baskets woven from skin. They scattered seeds of bone into the soil. Wherever the seeds landed, mushrooms bloomed, singing in small, polite voices. "They plant the dead," Nurgle said proudly. "So much more reliable than the living. The living try to choose where they'll grow." The psyker smiled despite himself. The laughter around him was contagious. It spread faster than any plague. He watched the Nurglings pat each seed as though tucking it into bed. He wanted to help. He reached for one of the bone seeds. It was warm, pulsing faintly like an egg about to hatch. The moment his fingers touched it, visions flooded him, entire worlds dying and rebirthing in one inhalation. He saw forests burning into black soil, then erupting with flowers shaped like lungs. He saw oceans boiling, then cooling into glass, then cracking into streams. He saw cities collapse into ash, then rise again from the hands of scavengers who learned to build with what was left. He saw himself dissolving into the cycle, like a note returning to melody. "I see it," he whispered. "Everything falls to you in the end." "Not falls," the god said gently. "Returns. The universe is a wheel. I am its patience." A silence settled between them. The garden breathed slowly, peacefully. Somewhere far off, a bell rang, a sound not of warning but of agreement. "Why do others fear you?" the Psyker asked. "Because they think I want their bodies," said Nurgle, almost sad. "But I already have their endings. What I want is their forgiveness. I am the apology written into creation, the admission that perfection was never part of the plan." The Psyker remembered the Emperor, his shining light, his gold that burned rather than warmed. He remembered the endless sermons about duty, purity, sacrifice. He remembered the smell of sanctified fire consuming the weak. And for the first time, he felt pity not for himself, but for that radiant God who had forgotten how to rot. "Decay is mercy," he said. "Decay is truth," replied Nurgle. "Mercy is what happens after truth stops pretending to be clean." The pond rippled. The faces beneath it smiled. The frogs sang louder. A flock of flies rose in formation, spelling words on the humid air. The Psyker read them and trembled. "Everything lives, because it dies. Everything dies, because it lives." He looked at Nurgle, whose eyes glowed like lanterns in fog. "You're not destruction," he said softly. "You're the conversation between endings and beginnings." "Exactly," Nurgle beamed, pleased as a baker with a perfect loaf. "And you, my little seed, are learning the language." He felt himself loosening again, like soil after rain. His body wanted to bloom. His skin tingled with the urge to split, to open, to offer. But the god stopped him with one gentle finger. "Not yet," Nurgle said. "You must return to the world above. They have forgotten what endings sound like when they sing." The Psyker wanted to protest, but the god's laughter rolled through him like thunder soaked in honey. "You'll remember," Nurgle promised. "You'll carry my warmth where the light burns too cold. When they spit at disease, you'll see healing. When they scream at rot, you'll hear laughter." The Psyker bowed, not in worship, but in gratitude. The ground opened, not violently, but as a mouth sighing goodbye. He began to sink. The soil swallowed him with affection, layer by layer, warm darkness, cool damp, faint music. His last sight was of the god turning back to his cauldrons, stirring the world into readiness. "Go," Nurgle whispered. "Remind them that life is not the opposite of decay. It is its perfume." Then there was nothing but the sound of breathing. He opened his eyes to the mortal world on a battlefield, among corpses already softening. The air was thick with smoke and rain. He inhaled, and the rain smelled faintly sweet. His body ached with the memory of peace. In the distance, a soldier coughed and laughed at once, and somewhere beyond the veil, a gentle voice chuckled, proud and patient. "Yes, that's it. Let it begin again." The first thing he noticed was the silence. Not the kind that means absence, but the kind that waits politely before speaking again. The battlefield around him had grown still. Smoke drifted like the last breath of an argument. The sky hung low and grey, reluctant to pick a side. He pushed himself up. His fingers sank into mud that pulsed faintly under the surface, as if the ground remembered what hearts were for. The Psyker's armor was gone. His robes were tattered, clinging to a body that felt softer than it should have. The air smelled of iron and milk. He was back among the living, or what passed for them. The dead lay everywhere, but the dead were busy. They whispered in the rain, leaking small flowers from their wounds. Insects walked across them as caretakers, not scavengers. The Psyker blinked. The movement seemed to disturb the veil between his thoughts and the god's patience. The garden was still in him, taking notes. He tried to remember the prayers he had been taught, the litany of purity, the benediction of cleansing. All of them felt dry in his mouth, brittle as sun-baked parchment. He spat them out and let new words grow. They tasted like understanding. "Everything that breaks," he murmured, "breaks towards something." From the haze, figures emerged. Soldiers of the Imperium, faces hidden behind cracked masks, eyes wide with the fatigue that only certainty brings. They approached slowly, bolters slack in their hands, unsure whether the man before them was survivor or spectre. "Identify yourself," one barked, voice trembling with authority too heavy for his throat. The psyker smiled, a small, ordinary smile, the kind used for children. "I am what remains," he said simply. They hesitated. There was something about him, something clean and unclean in the same breath. The rain thickened, golden flecks glimmering where it fell. One of the soldiers reached out, touched a drop that landed on his glove. The metal hissed. Beneath it, skin healed an old scar. "It's holy water," whispered another. "It's something," said the first, his voice breaking on the word. The psyker stood, and the ground followed. Vines crawled up the boots of the fallen. Mud reshaped itself into faces, too peaceful for victory. The soldiers fell back, crossing themselves with the sign of the Aquila, muttering prayers that had forgotten their purpose. "Don't be afraid," he said. "Fear is just the body begging to be held." They stared, transfixed. One knelt without knowing why. Another began to cry, the tears steaming on his cheeks, as if ashamed of their temperature. The psyker looked to the horizon. The world was dying beautifully. Fields of ash shimmered in hues of rust and violet. The bones of tanks jutted like the ribs of prehistoric beasts. From their ruins rose moss that glittered faintly green, a delicate sickness taking shape as art. He heard it then, laughter. Faint, familiar, drifting through the smoke. Not the cruel laughter of demons. The round laughter, the one that had no edges. He smiled and whispered to the unseen air, "You're still watching." And the air, polite as always, smiled back. He began to walk. Wherever his bare feet touched, the soil softened. Each step left behind a bloom the color of old bronze, each bloom releasing a sigh that smelled of forgiveness. The soldiers followed without command. They did not know if they followed a saint or a contagion, and it didn't seem to matter. As they walked, he spoke softly, almost absently, as if translating a dream for those who could no longer dream. "You were told that pain is proof of worth, that to suffer is to serve, that purity is the reward for burning. But what if the fire is the disease? What if the cure is the warmth of the ash?" The words wrapped around them like mist. They did not preach, they invited. "The Emperor promises light," he continued, "but light blinds. It exposes. It punishes shadows for existing. My father offers shade, rest, a place where even the broken parts are used again." One soldier raised his weapon halfway, trembling. "You speak heresy," he whispered, though his voice carried no conviction. "Then bless the heresy," the psyker replied. "It is only faith that has learned to rot." The weapon lowered. Thunder rolled in the distance, slow and deliberate, like someone turning over in their sleep. The psyker felt it vibrate in his bones, the deep, wet heartbeat of something enormous and satisfied. "He hears you," he murmured. "Who?" the soldier asked. "The one who smiles." A wind rose, and with it came the hum of flies. The soldiers looked up. The sky was not dark with wings, it was alive with them. A living choir. The buzzing merged into harmony, strange and soothing, like a lullaby written for the end of things. Somewhere in that music, the psyker heard a word. Just one. "Continue." He nodded, whispering back, "Always." They reached the remains of a cathedral. The great doors had fallen inward. Inside, the altars were covered in mold that glittered gold. The statues of saints had cracked, but from their fractures sprouted vines heavy with blossoms. The pews were full of bodies sitting very still, some dead, some pretending to be. He walked down the aisle. The sound of his steps echoed like rain on empty tin. "This was once a place of cleansing," he said softly. "They came here to wash themselves of guilt, but guilt is not a stain. It is the soil in which understanding grows." He climbed the pulpit, resting his hands on its edge. The wood sagged, grateful for the attention. "The Emperor gave them purpose," he said, "but not comfort. My father gives comfort, but not purpose. Between them, the galaxy learned to survive." He looked out over the room, over the silent congregation of corpses and pilgrims. "They call him the Lord of Decay," he said. "But decay is only another word for change. We have stopped blessing." The air thickened. The smell of rot became incense. The flies entered through the broken windows, moving as one slow tide. They gathered on the altar, covering it completely, until the gold beneath turned black. Then, as one, they lifted again, revealing a pattern, a spiral, turning inward forever. The Psyker smiled. "The circle," he whispered. "The promise kept." He descended the steps. His hands brushed against the nearest statue, a sister of battle carved in marble. The stone pulsed once under his touch, then cracked. Beneath the marble, something green glowed faintly, breathing. "Even faith can flower," he said. The soldiers behind him had fallen to their knees. Some prayed to the Emperor, others prayed to nothing at all. It didn't matter. Nurgle heard both. The Psyker turned toward the door. The world beyond the cathedral shimmered like fever. "I will go where it hurts," he said, "where hope has soured into bitterness. There, I will plant the truth." He stepped into the rain again. The garden's memory followed him, a heartbeat underfoot, a chuckle in the wind, the perfume of endings becoming beginnings. Behind him, the cathedral walls bloomed. Moss crept over icons, vines wrapped around relics, and from the mouth of every saint grew a small, laughing flower. The Psyker walked into the storm, and the storm bent to kiss his brow. He could feel the god's amusement, soft, paternal, infinite. "You always send them back broken," he said aloud. And somewhere, far away, Nurgle's laughter rolled across the sky like thunder wrapped in silk. "Broken things," the god replied, "are just open doors." The Psyker smiled through the rain, eyes half closed, hearing that laughter fade into the steady breath of the living world. The war would go on, the light would burn, the plague would spread, the garden would wait, and in that waiting, hope would rot beautifully, endlessly into something worth worshipping. The rain did not stop. It never does when a god is listening. It only softens, slows, becomes rhythm instead of refusal. The Psyker walked until the horizon dissolved into fog, and the fog began to whisper back in languages older than lungs. Every step left the echo of wet roots beneath his feet. The world was changing, though it had always been changing. Now it simply admitted it. Grass sprouted from the cracks in steel. Rust turned to red moss, spreading like thought. The carrion birds circled not as scavengers, but as witnesses. They understood the sacrament of rot. He came to a river. Once, perhaps, it had been sewage from a manufactorum black, poisonous, a scar that no wind could heal. Now it glimmered with an oily iridescence, golds and greens moving together, like forgiveness, pretending to be light. The Psyker knelt. He touched the surface. It trembled and sang in tiny ripples. Beneath the water, he saw faces, some new, some ancient, all smiling through distortion. They mouthed words he already knew. "It is all right." He cupped the water in his palms and drank. It tasted like the end of worry. When he looked up, a figure waited across the riverbank. Armor of corroded bronze, body vast, haloed by the hum of flies. A warrior, one of the Death Guard. His bolter hung loosely at his side, his visor cracked. A single green glow pulsed where his eye should be. "You," the Psyker said softly. The warrior nodded. "I heard you." He stepped into the river. Water clung to him like a blessing. When he reached the opposite bank, his boots sank into the mud with the sound of weary relief. "We fought here," he said, voice deep and calm. "Before the plague, before the laughter, I killed thousands for purity. I watched them rot and thought I was winning." He looked at the Psyker. His voice trembled, a cathedral cracking under its own faith. "Now I understand. The Emperor's light was too clean. It burned the shadows out of men. But we are shadows too." The Psyker nodded. "And you are forgiven." The warrior laughed, low and sincere. "Forgiven? Brother, there is nothing left to forgive. We are compost now, useful again." They stood in silence, two remnants of a faith that had eaten itself. The flies swirled between them like incense, arranging halos no priest would dare paint. "He sent you," said the warrior. "He sent everyone," replied the Psyker. "We just forgot we were messengers." The warrior unlatched his helm and let it fall. His face was ruin, made gentle cheeks cratered with sores, beard clotted with mold, eyes bright with an impossible youth. He breathed deeply, savoring the humidity of decay. "The rot doesn't hurt anymore," he said. "It hums. It remembers me." "That's the gift," said the Psyker. "Pain that learns to sing." The warrior knelt and scooped a handful of mud. He shaped it into a crude figurine, a tiny child, belly round, arms open wide. He placed it on a stone and stepped back. "Every plague ends with laughter," he said. "And every laugh," answered the Psyker, "is the body forgiving itself." Thunder rolled again. This time it was closer, slower, fonder. The rain thickened into warm drizzle, perfumed with clove and copper. The air itself seemed alive, each droplet a syllable of the same long prayer. Continue, continue, continue. The Psyker looked toward the horizon. It pulsed faintly green, like the glow of a wound deciding not to close. "They will come for us," he said. "They will call it infection." The warrior smiled. "They always do. But infection is just faith wearing the wrong uniform." A wind rose behind them, carrying a soft, distant chuckle, the unmistakable warmth of the Plaguefather's amusement. It brushed through their hair, stirred the flies into swirling constellations. "He's proud," the Psyker whispered. "He's always proud," said the warrior. "His garden grows in every direction. Even the stars will bloom when they die." The Psyker turned to him. "Will you walk with me until the worms tell us to stop?" They began to move again, through ruins, through rain, through silence that kept trying to be peace. Their footprints filled instantly with water and tiny green shoots. The world followed them, healing in its own slow, indecent way. When they reached what had once been a city wall, the Psyker stopped. Carved into the crumbling stone was the sigil of the Aquila wings cracked, halo chipped, a monument to a perfection that could not last. He laid his hand upon it, feeling the stone sigh. "You will learn too," he told it. "Even gods have to decompose." He pressed his palm harder. The crack widened. Spores drifted from his skin into the fissure. Moss began to creep along the wings. By dawn, the symbol would bloom. Behind him, the Death Guard laughed quietly. "Blasphemy," he said. "No," the Psyker replied, still smiling. "Baptism." Lightning flashed overhead, but it was green, not white. For a moment, the sky seemed to have veins. The rain turned to gold dust. The battlefield shivered and exhaled. The Psyker closed his eyes. In the darkness behind them, he felt the god's enormous patience stretching across eternity, a gardener tending a galaxy that did not know it was soil. And somewhere, beyond words, Nurgle whispered, "The gift is not death, little one. It is the permission to begin again." He breathed in. The air filled his lungs like honey. He opened his mouth. The laughter came soft, contagious, endless. The warrior joined him. Then the flies. Then the rain. And soon, the whole world was laughing. Not cruelly, not madly, just joyfully like a wound, learning how to heal by never closing. He did not sleep again after that night. Sleep belonged to the living, and the living still thought that endings were pauses between beginnings. The Psyker walked through the drenched earth and found that the ground knew his feet by name. When he stepped, worms rose to greet him, the way choirs stand when the hymn begins. The warrior walked beside him. The rain had stopped pretending to be separate from the air. Everything was moisture and memory. Around them, the world remade itself in small, polite gestures, moss covering the arrogance of marble, vines whispering apologies into bullet holes. Every ruin rehearsed forgiveness in green syllables. They passed a field of tanks that had become hills, their treads buried under grass, their gun barrels colonized by birds. Rust flaked into red pollen, and when the wind blew, it carried the smell of warm iron and yeast. The Psyker reached out, touched one barrel, and it hummed softly, in return a hymn for machines learning how to die properly. "They thought they would last forever," he murmured. "Forever," the warrior said, "is what metal promises when it doesn't know what kindness is." They kept walking. The fog grew thicker. Shapes moved inside it slow, massive, unafraid. Giants of armor, once champions of discipline, now gardens of flesh and rust. Plague Marines, their bodies flowering through the cracks in their ceramite. They turned when they saw the Psyker, and their voices came through the mist like bells rung underwater. "Prophet," they said. "The Bloomkeeper returns." The warrior bowed. "He is no prophet," he said. "He is a memory that remembered us." The Psyker smiled. "I am a messenger," he said. "I carry a word that is not mine." They gathered around him. Flies filled the air, but not with menace, with ceremony. The Plague Marines knelt, and their armor exhaled spores that glowed faintly in the dusk. The smell was thick, not foul, only honest. "Speak," said one. "Let the rot hear itself." He closed his eyes, and the voice that came was not entirely his own. "You are not broken. You are soft enough to shape. You are not cursed. You are patient enough to wait. You are not dying. You are being reintroduced to the rest of yourselves." The Plague Marines nodded, their laughter slow and satisfied. One of them removed his helm, and inside was not a face, but a garden. Fungus glowed where eyes should be. Flowers bloomed from the tongue. "He smiles through us," the thing said, and the voice was gentle. "He always does," replied the Psyker. "Even when the stars burn down, he will smile through the dust." They walked together after that, a procession of decay moving without destination. Birds followed overhead, not cawing but humming. The wind carried no scent of war, only the warm musk of things deciding to rest. At the edge of the fog, the world changed again. A cliff overlooked an ocean that wasn't water. It was a vast sheet of shimmering slime, breathing in tides. The surface rippled with faces, mountains, hands. They rose and sank in slow ecstasy, forming and unforming as if sculptors were arguing lovingly. "The Sea of Return," the warrior said, reverent. "Everything ends here," the Psyker answered, "and begins again." He stepped closer. The surface of the ocean pulsed to meet him, warm and deliberate. He saw within it the memory of stars dying and turning into gardens. He saw planets swallowed by plague and reborn as ecosystems without pain. He saw himself 1,000 times born, dying, returning, all part of one long, smiling breath. The sea spoke, in the voice he had always known. "You've done well, my child. You remembered the truth, and you carried it without fear." "I only repeated what was already written," he said. "That is all any teacher ever does," Nurgle replied. "Even I." The sea shivered, delighted. Waves rose and broke in laughter. Each drop that fell onto the Psyker's skin burned gold green and left behind tiny spirals, the mark of continuation. "Will it ever end?" the Psyker asked. "It never began," said the god. "There was only breathing. The rest was decoration." He felt his body grow heavy. Not with weariness, with purpose. Every cell itched with wanting to open. His veins pulsed in rhythm with the tides. His heart laughed once, softly, and dissolved into warmth. "You've carried enough," Nurgle whispered. "Now, let me carry you." The Psyker turned to the warrior. "You will tell them?" The warrior nodded. "I will tell them that endings are polite lies, that we are compost, and compost is holy." The Psyker smiled. "That is the sermon." He stepped forward. The sea embraced him. His body folded into itself like a flower closing at dusk. He sank, not fast, not slow, just appropriately. Around him, the slime glowed brighter, singing in bubbles. Each note was a word. Each word was a thank you. The warrior watched until the last ripple flattened, then bowed low. His armor wept rust. His mouth murmured the simplest prayer in the universe. "Continue." The Plague Marines answered as one. "Continue." And the wind carried the word away, through the valleys and the void, through the cracks in reality where light had once ruled unchallenged. In the far reaches of the warp, stars coughed out their last hydrogen and, in the silence after, began to bloom. In the depths of forgotten hive cities, mold grew into cathedrals. On dead worlds, spores whispered to fossils, teaching them how to laugh again. And in the heart of it all, Nurgle stirred his cauldron and hummed a lullaby only decay could love. The broth inside glowed with galaxies. Every bubble was a life. Every burst was a death. Every scent was forgiveness made fragrant. He looked into his work and saw himself reflected vast, patient, smiling. "Ah," he said fondly, "they're beginning again." The cauldron burped. The flies applauded. And somewhere, deep in the mulch of infinity, a single voice, the remnant of a Psyker who had finally understood, whispered softly, "Thank you, Father." The voice sank, was swallowed, and returned as the rustle of leaves. The garden never slept. It only waited for the next breath. And when the breath came, it sounded like laughter. The galaxy, vast and trembling, spun like an old wheel with cracked spokes. Each revolution creaked with exhaustion, yet it did not break. It could not. Something, somewhere, refused to let it stop. The Psyker was gone, but not lost. His name had dissolved into the soil of reality, carried in spores that drifted through the warp, invisible to any but those who had learned to listen. The air itself whispered his message in the small language of rust and mildew, in the warm sigh of breath upon glass, in the shiver that comes before sleep. Across the stars, decay worked its quiet mercy. On one dying world, beneath the ashen clouds of an endless bombardment, soldiers coughed blood into their hands and smiled faintly as the blood turned to moss. The moss spread between them, knitting their bodies into a single carpet of trembling green. They died holding one another's hands, and the field bloomed. On another world, a shrine had burned for 7 years straight. The flames had turned black, and the priests had gone blind from staring into the light. One day, the fire simply sighed and went out, leaving behind smoke that smelled of sugar and rain. From the ashes rose a flower the size of a cathedral, its petals inscribed with prayers for surrender. The priests fell to their knees, not in worship, but in relief. And in the void between worlds, where ships wandered blind through the screaming tides of the warp, something new stirred. The captains who had once heard only torment now heard a hum beneath the madness, a heartbeat too steady to belong to demons, a rhythm, a pulse, the sound of the universe remembering itself. The Death Guard heard it too. Their plague ships, once drifting coffins, began to bloom from within. Fungal growth sprouted over control panels. Rust became lace. From the vents came laughter. The warriors aboard listened and felt no shame. "He is near," said one, wiping dew from his visor. "He has never been far," said another. The ships drifted on, leaving trails of pollen in the void, bright, shimmering streams of dust that clung to asteroids and moons. Where the dust settled, new life began to stir. Soft green, stubborn, and entirely uninvited. Even on Terra, under the golden shroud of the throne, something shifted. The Mechanicus adepts whispered of moisture gathering in the lower halls, of small molds blooming in the cracks of sacred metal. They scraped them away, of course they always did. But the molds returned, and each time they did, they arranged themselves in the shape of a smile. In the warp, gods watched. Khorne roared and broke his throne of skulls again. Tzeentch snarled and rewrote his plans in blood that would not dry. Slaanesh laughed too loudly to hide the tremor beneath. And in the middle of them all, Grandfather Nurgle stirred in his garden. Content. "They call me a god of endings," he said, voice like the churn of warm oceans. "But I am the reason anything remains." He dipped his ladle into the cauldron, tasted, and nodded with pride. "They burn, they fight, they starve, they rot, and still they breathe. I am in every breath they don't notice." He looked up, past the canopy of his eternal garden, past the fat clouds of flies that haloed his realm, and into the darkness beyond. The warp pulsed there, hungry, chaotic, endless. He smiled. "Let them rage," he said. "Someone must be the silence after the scream." In the mortal galaxy, on a nameless moon orbiting a dying sun, a child was born amid plague. Her mother wept, not from sorrow but from awe. The infant's skin glowed faintly green, veins visible like vines beneath pale bark. When the child cried, the air smelled of earth after rain. The midwife fainted, whispering, "He smiles again." The child would grow and wander. Wherever she went, famine softened, fever calmed, and grief remembered laughter. People called her witch, saint, heretic. She never corrected them. She only said, "Everything that falls will bloom again." And it did, because that was the truth hidden behind horror, the unseen mercy of rot. Decay was not a punishment. It was a promise. The Emperor's light burned because it must. Nurgle's warmth spread because it could. Between them, the galaxy staggered but survived, caught between fire and soil, between annihilation and renewal. If the light ever went out completely, Nurgle would wait patiently in the dark, hands ready, breath gentle, to catch what remained. If all matter returned to dust, he would whisper into the dust until it remembered shapes again. If every god fell silent, he would still hum, because someone must keep the rhythm. The garden grew, always, even when it seemed to die, especially then, and through it all, Nurgle smiled, ancient, tired, radiant. "The others build empires," he said. "I build patience." Flies gathered in halos around his head. In their wings shimmered entire galaxies. "They will fight, they will burn, they will rebuild. I will wait, I always wait, because the universe belongs not to the strong, but to the stubborn." He laughed. It was not cruel, it was not loud, it was simply eternal. And somewhere, on a forgotten planet where the grass grew from graves and the rain was warm, a voice rose from the soil, soft, familiar, reverent. Continue. The wind repeated it, the stars obeyed, and the galaxy, though tired beyond words, took another breath, because decay never ends, it only dreams. There will come a day, perhaps, it has come already, when the stars themselves begin to dim, not suddenly, but gently, like old candles remembering bedtime. The light will weaken, the cold will spread, and for the first time in all creation, even fire will forget why it burns. Worlds will drift into silence. The oceans will freeze beneath glass skies. Cities will crumble into dust, their towers sighing as they fall, relieved to be finished with the pretense of standing tall. All the engines, all the prayers, all the wars quiet now. The galaxy, so proud and violent in its youth, will finally do what it always feared most. It will rest, and when that happens, when time begins to decay faster than flesh ever did, something will move in the dark. Not violently, not hungrily, merely with purpose. A tremor, a pulse. The last sound in the universe will not be a scream. It will be breathing, deep, slow, contented. From the ashes of everything, a warmth will bloom. Not the harsh gold of the Emperor's light, not the cruel flame of chaos's rage, something older, softer, a glow that smells of rain and endings. The garden will awaken. Its roots will rise from beneath dead stars. Its tendrils will weave through the bones of extinct worlds. Its leaves will unfurl where suns once burned, drinking the remnants of light. And from the heart of it all, he will rise. Nurgle, grandfather of decay, the patient one, the eternal gardener. His cauldron will bubble again, though there is no matter left to feed it. The broth will shimmer with starlight, thick and golden green. Within it, galaxies will dissolve like crumbs in soup. He will taste, nod, and smile. Still warm, he will say, still good. The flies will return not as vermin, but as heralds. Their wings will hum the final hymn of existence, a music older than birth, older than time. The hum will spread through the empty void, waking memories that thought they had died. Fragments of planets will remember how to be soil. Atoms will remember how to dance. Silence will remember how to sing. It was never destruction. He will murmur to no one and everyone. It was digestion. And digestion is just another kind of creation. He will walk through the ruins of stars, each step leaving behind blossoms made of light and shadow. Around him, the air, or what remains of it, will shimmer with small laughter. Every mote of dust, every echo, every forgotten name will join the chorus. The galaxy will not end. It will compost. In the rot, colors will return. Golds and greens, deep reds, soft blues. The warmth will grow until it fills the void itself. The garden will spread across what was once the universe, infinite and intimate, filled with breathing, always breathing. The psyker will be there, though he has long since stopped being a man. His voice will be the wind, his hands will be the rain, his smile will be every petal that opens on every forgotten world. You kept your promise, he will whisper. I always do, Nurgle will reply. Everything that ends returns to me, and I return it to everything. He will look into the distance, though there is no distance anymore. Just soft light, endless and kind. Sleep now, he will tell the stars. You've done enough, and the stars will obey. One by one, they will drift into his garden, sinking into the soil of his love. Their dying light will not fade, it will be absorbed, shared, multiplied. From their remains, flowers of flame will bloom, eternal and tender. The garden will glow with their memory, and the universe, finally, will understand. There was never death, only the pause between breaths. There was never despair, only the moment before laughter. And there was never an end, only the patience of rot, waiting to begin again. Nurgle will rest beside his cauldron, stirring slowly, humming to himself a lullaby too vast for words. The flies will settle on his shoulders like ornaments of devotion. The air will shimmer with contentment. The others built empires, he will say softly. I built a promise. He will raise one great hand and let it fall gently upon the soil. It will tremble once, as if sighing in sleep. The echo of his touch will ripple outward, across every atom, through every dream that ever was or could be. The echo will say only one thing: continue, and it will. The garden will continue. The breathing will continue. The laughter will continue until the next universe grows, until the next spark decides it is tired of being alone. And when that spark lights again in the darkness, when the new cosmos unfolds its first trembling atoms, it will not know where its warmth comes from. It will not know why it breathes so easily. But deep inside it, beneath the equations and the matter, in the first pulse of its first heart, there will be a whisper, gentle, familiar, smiling, "Welcome back, my child." And the laughter will begin anew, not cruel, not mocking, just eternal. Because even after everything ends, the garden dreams, and the dream never ends.